Full story. Every Luna candidate looked away from the Alpha King's son, until the rejected Omega sat beside him. Every Luna candidate looked away from the Alpha King's son, until the rejected Omega sat beside him. Nobody in the Iron Moon Pack talked about the Luna selection the way they talked about a celebration. They talked about it the way people talk about a storm. Something coming. Something you prepare for. Something you survive. Once a year, the Alpha King gathered the highest-ranking she-wolves from every noble family in the territory. They were dressed beautifully. They were trained to stand tall, speak carefully, and smile in a way that showed confidence, but not too much of it. They came from powerful bloodlines. They had grown up being told that this moment, standing in that great marble hall, being seen by the Crown Prince, was the whole point of everything they had done so far. And every year, without fail, Prince Kael walked the line of candidates, looked through each one of them like they were windows instead of people, and returned to his seat without a single word. He was not rude about it. He was something worse than rude. He was completely unbothered, like none of it reached him at all. The other nobles whispered that the prince had gone cold after something happened years ago, something the palace refused to explain. All they knew was that Kael, who had once been spoken of as sharp and quietly warm, had become a man who carried silence around him like armor. The candidates this year were no different from the ones before. 12 of them, all polished, all carefully chosen. The most talked about among them was a girl named Lena, from the Voss family, Beta bloodline, dark-haired, with the kind of composure that made her look like she had been born specifically for this room. She had been preparing for the selection for 2 years. She was not just hoping to be chosen. She expected it. Nobody was thinking about Saren. Honestly, why would they? Saren was an Omega. She had no title, no family name that carried weight. And 6 months ago, she had been publicly rejected by her fated mate in front of half the pack. He had looked at her, said the words, and walked away. Just like that, like she was a door he had decided not to open. Since then, Saren had been existing more than living. She had taken up work in the palace. Small tasks, background things, carrying trays, arranging linens, moving through rooms without being noticed, which had started to feel like a skill she had accidentally gotten very good at. On the evening of the Luna selection, she was not supposed to be in the main hall at all. She was supposed to leave a tray of goblets near the side entrance and go back to the kitchens. But the side entrance was blocked by a crowd of noble families arriving late, and by the time she found another way in, the ceremony had already started. The hall was full of people standing along the walls, watching. She could not get back out without walking through the middle of everything, so she did the only thing she could do. She found an empty chair near the back, one that had been left there by a servant who had already slipped out, set her tray down carefully on the floor beside her feet, and sat, just for a moment. Just until she could move again without causing a scene. She was not watching Kael. She was watching the floor, mostly, and thinking about how tired her feet were. That was when she felt it. That particular stillness that comes over a room when something unexpected happens. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. She looked up. Kael had stopped walking. He was standing near the middle of the candidate line, exactly where he was supposed to be, and he had simply stopped. His head had turned, just slightly, away from the women in front of him and toward the back of the room, toward her. Saren looked behind herself, genuinely, because her first thought was that someone important must have walked in. There was no one there, just the wall. She looked back. He was still looking at her. For a second she thought she had done something wrong, sat in the wrong place, broken some rule she didn't know about. She started to stand, and then Kael began walking, not back to his seat, not further down the candidate line. He walked across the room, past all 12 women who had spent months preparing for this moment, past the nobles pressed along the walls, past his father's throne where the Alpha King was now sitting very, very still, and he walked until he reached the chair beside Saren. He sat down. The hall went so quiet that Saren could hear her own heartbeat. She did not know what to do. She did not think she was supposed to do anything. She just sat there, very still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead, while her brain tried to catch up with what was happening. Kael said nothing for a long moment. He sat beside her, the way someone sits when they have finally found a place to rest. Not dramatically, not with any performance in it. Just still, and Saren, who had been braced for something terrible, slowly noticed that the silence between them did not feel like danger. It felt, strangely, like the first quiet she had found in months. Across the room, Lena Voss had gone completely pale. The 12 candidates stood in their perfect line, and none of them moved, but every single one of them was watching. The nobles exchanged glances no one dared to turn into whispers. The Alpha King had not moved from his throne, but his eyes had not left the back of the room either. Kale turned to look at Saren. Not quickly, like he had decided to. "You are not a candidate," he said. It was not a question. "No," she said. "I was delivering something. I got stuck." He was quiet again for a moment. Then, "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Saren thought about that honestly, the way she would think about any question. "I think," she said slowly, "when something very painful has already happened to you, it changes the way other things feel. The worst thing I could imagine happened 6 months ago. After that, most things seem—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Manageable." She was not trying to be interesting, she was just telling the truth. It was the only thing she had left that still felt like hers. Something in Kale's face changed. Not a smile, not even close to one, but a shift, like a door that has been closed for a very long time creaking slightly open. The morning after the selection, the palace moved like a disturbed anthill. Lena Voss was not crying, she was too controlled for that. But she was talking, and the things she said moved fast. An Omega in the hall, a servant, someone who had already been rejected, which everyone knew, because rejections leave marks that wolves can sense. The implication was clear. This could not mean anything. This should not be allowed to mean anything. Saren's former mate came to find her 2 days later. He had clearly heard what happened. He stood in the corridor outside the linen room and told her he had been thinking about things, that he had made a mistake, that he missed her. Saren looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the day he had rejected her. She thought about how she had stood there and felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. She thought about the months since then, the grief that had felt like weather, like something she just had to wait out. "I believe that you mean that," she said carefully. "But what you're feeling right now is not about me. It's about what you just found out." She picked up her basket of linens and walked past him. He did not follow. That evening, Kale sent a palace attendant to ask if she would meet him in the East Garden. No formal title, no summons. Just a request, phrased like one. She went. They walked slowly along the stone path between the old trees, and he asked her things. Small things, real things. What she had done before working at the palace. What she thought about when she was quiet. Whether she had family nearby. She answered him the same way she had the first time, honestly, without trying to be anything other than what she was. And he listened, which she had not expected, in the way that people rarely listen, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually taking in what she said. She asked him once, very carefully, what had made him walk across the room that night. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Everyone in that room was performing something. Every person there had a face they were wearing. You were the only one who wasn't trying to be seen, and somehow that made you the only one I actually saw." 3 weeks later, at the closing banquet of the Luna selection, the formal dinner where the Crown Prince traditionally announced his consideration of a candidate, Kale stood up before the entire court. He looked at the 12 women at the long table. He looked at his father. He looked at the rows of nobles with their careful faces. And he said, plainly and without any drama in his voice, that he was withdrawing his consideration of all presented candidates. That the Luna selection, as it had been designed, was a process for finding a performance, and he had no interest in choosing a performance. He named Saren, not with speeches, not with declarations, simply by saying that he had met someone honest, and that he intended to continue knowing her, with the court's awareness, if not their blessing. The Alpha King called a council the next morning. It was not a warm meeting. The question of bloodline was raised, then the question of rank, then the question of what it would look like to the other packs. Each question was a wall being built, brick by brick. Saren was brought in to stand before them. She had not been warned. She walked into a room full of the most powerful people in the territory, stood in the center of it, and for the first time in her life, maybe the first time ever, did not try to make herself smaller. She told them who she was. Not her rank, not her bloodline, Those things they already knew and had already decided didn't count for much. She told them what she had learned about herself after the rejection, that she had discovered she could be broken and still rebuild, that she had found out her worth was not something another person could take from her by walking away, that she had spent 6 months thinking she had nothing, and had slowly realized she had the one thing most people in that room had probably never had to develop, the knowledge of what she was made of when everything else was gone. She was not angry when she said it. She was not performing bravery. She was just telling the truth, the same way she always did. Nobody had told her that Cale was standing in the doorway behind her. He had arrived partway through and had not announced himself. He stood there and listened to every word. The Alpha King looked at his son for a long moment after Saren finished. Then he looked back at her. Something in his expression had shifted. The political calculation was still there, but underneath it was something that might have been, in a man like him, a form of respect. He withdrew his opposition, not with warmth, not with a speech. He simply said that the council's concerns were noted and set aside, and moved on to the next matter. Lena Voss left the palace that same week, with her composure intact and her plans quietly redirected elsewhere. Saren's former mate faded back into the ordinary life of the pack, where he would spend a long time thinking about the difference between recognizing someone's value and actually deserving them. Cale and Saren did not have a grand romantic moment after all of that. What they had was smaller and more real. A walk in the same garden. A conversation that lasted longer than either of them expected. And the particular feeling of being with someone who does not need you to be anything other than what you already are. She had walked into that hall carrying a tray, exhausted, with no plans, and no hope, and no idea that anything was about to change. And that, in the end, was exactly why it did. Because she was not trying, she was just there, fully, quietly, entirely herself. And it turned out that in a room full of people performing their worth, the most remarkable thing a person can do is simply be real. Some people spend their whole lives learning that. Saren had learned it the hard way, but she had learned it, and that made all the difference. Copy story text.